Can you talk a little bit about like your childhood, like what that was like before the war?
Well, my childhood was normal, like any little Dutch kid, you know. Go skating during the winter, and used to have ice, and they used to have an organ on the ice where they played music. You know, you turn the wheel and you get that organ music, and we used to skate to that. And then in the winter, there was a little town, Gouda, you know, Gouda cheese.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the town we went to from Rotterdam, and that's about 30 kilometers.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to skate through the canals all the way there. And then the way to do that, you buy little clay pipes over there in Gouda, and you put them back on your shirt. And if you didn't break them back, you won a prize. So we skated, and usually it was 5 guys and 1 girl because she always hung around with us. And we take a long broomstick, you know, and stuck it on our arm, and we all went the same together. And we like a bunch of geese flying, you know. You switch because the first one gets tired. So the first one went to the rear, and the second one became number 1. So we kept on going, and up and up and up, and all the way back to Rotterdam. Yeah, and that was, you know, fun. And then in the summer we went swimming and we went fishing and stuff like that. And we went to the beach and on the North Sea. That's right, you know, on the ocean, and had a lot of good memories of that. And then rumblings of the war started. So my dad was a surveyor, and the war started, and we were there in May 14, 1940. And matter of fact, that article came out the same day it did 71 years later, when the war started, May 10, 1940, and the paper came out. And our house was bombed, and the walls buckled in. We couldn't get out, so our neighbor came and helped us out of there. And nobody got hurt, and my dad had a little small garden, maybe 4 or 5 miles out of Rotterdam, in a farm field where everybody had a little garage where you could spend the night, and there was a little water there, and a little pot you could cook and everything, you know. So we stayed there for 6 weeks until we got back to find a place to live, you know. And it was like a little garden. They grow their summer stuff there, and they take it home when harvest time came, you know. And after that, things were steadying, you know. The stuff was still there, the food was pretty decent, you know. The Germans, you know, you had to take them, you know. But everything went by. They weren't nasty to us at all, you know. But then in 43, things were getting bad, you know. My dad was picked up by the Germans because he was a surveyor, and he was sent to Gdansk, Poland, and that used to be Danzig. And he was there to survey an airfield for the Germans, and he stayed there till the war ended. And they shipped him like they did the Jews, 60 people in a boxcar with no toilet facilities, no nothing. And he got to where he was going, you know. But I didn't know what happened to him. He didn't know what happened to me. My mother didn't know, you know. So in 1944, things were really getting bad. People were burning their own furniture just to have some heat in the house, you know. And we lived in an apartment like where the hallway is one way, and you have apartments on this side and apartments on this side, and it goes from the front to the back. Well, the people on the right side, they were in the black market, and they always were cooking good stuff, you know. You could smell it, and we didn't have nothing, you know. So my grandma used to go out there, and we didn't have no refrigeration, you know. So you look out the back window, they had a little shelf there where they put their milk and stuff to keep it cool, you know. And we could reach over there, you know. So one day during the nighttime, about 2 o'clock in the morning, my grandma went over there, and she thought she picked up that Dutch oven pot, these steel ones, you know, and it was covered with fat, but it was a chunk of beef in there, you know. So she heated it up, cut a piece off, put it back in the pot, put it back there. In the morning, it was all nice and flat again with all the grease on there, you know. So nobody knew we took any, you know. And that went on for a month or so, and then one day she went to grab it, and the people took the pot inside. So we were caught, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, but it helped us in the time, you know. And then things were still getting worse, and hardly anything to eat. So I told my mom, I I says, you're living with your mom and dad. I says, I'll give you my ration card. And I was 14 at the time. I says, I'll go find a place where I could stay at a farm, you know. Well, a lot of crying went on naturally, you know. See, I was the only child at that time, you know, all my sisters, stepsisters. So I went from farm to farm, you know, go this way, maybe get a little crust of bread, went to this farm, maybe get a half a cup of milk. And this went on, sleep at the hayloft at night, you know, and this went on until maybe a week and a half or so, and I wake up in a hospital. And I found out later a German soldier had found me and brought me to the hospital, you know. And people say, well, why would a German soldier do that? And, well, he's probably like a regular army soldier like the Americans, you know. They weren't forced, they were drafted. So he probably had a couple boys back home too, you know. So, yeah, I probably saved my life. So I stayed there until I was well enough. And they didn't have too much food to give me either, you know. So I started walking again, and I went across the bridge, and as soon as I was across the bridge, the Germans had some trucks coming across the bridge, and the British and the Americans strafed it. So I could have been killed there, you know. Anyway, a couple days after that, I found a farm, and the lady's husband had just passed away. And she says, you can stay here. So I wanted to show my gratitude. I wanted to go out right away and work. She said, oh, no, you're too damn thin, you know. I was skin and bones at the time, you know. But when you came into that farmhouse, at that time there was no transportation because everything was locked down, you know. But they had hams and sausages hanging on the ceiling, you know, and your eyes start bulging, you know. And I wanted to eat everything I could. She said, oh, no, you know, a little bit at a time, you know. So it was about a week before she thought I could go and help in the farm, you know. And talking about farms, they're not big farms, you know. They're about 10 acres, you know. Each piece had a little plot of land, maybe 8 to 10 cows, maybe a pig or two, and about 10, 15 chickens, you know. So I stayed there till the end of the war. And their neighbor was the gentleman I showed you, you know. And Thijs was his name, Thys. And we used to sit on a little hill, and at that time, the Americans would fly over in 1944 to bomb Germany, you know. And over Holland was about the returning point for the fighters to go back. So once the Americans got about by where we were, the fighters would turn back, and then the German fighters would come up because the guys didn't have no protection anymore. They would shoot down the, you know. But then a couple months later, the American fighters start carrying wing tanks. So they could go all the way to Germany and back, but once they used those tanks up, they would jettison them, you know, and they would land in the farmer's field, you know, and they still had 2-3 gallons of aviation gas in there, highly volatile, you know. But the farmers, first they wanted to use it as lamp because we didn't have no kerosene, no gasoline, you know. So a couple of them got blown up. But then they started cutting it with vegetable oil and stuff like that so they could use it as a burning lamp, you know. And I remember the people I was with, they were quite religious, you know. They read the Bible every night. And the only light they had was on a bicycle with a generator on it with a light. And I used to sit on the table and pedal so they could read the Bible, you know. But yeah, it was different, you know. And I have many good memories of that. And then in the summer there, they or the springtime, they used to have come and they instead of having their own harvesting equipment, they would have one thrashing machine that would service maybe 30 farmers. And all the 30 farmers would come to this particular house, and they would get them supper and lunch and everything, and they would get all the work done on that farm. And then they go to the next farm with the same thrashing machine and did the same thing, you know. And then they took me to church, you know, and I didn't know, I couldn't, you know, whatever they were doing. I wasn't brought up in that religion at the time, you know. So they says, well, do good for yourself and pump the organ. So I sat there and pumped that organ every day. So yeah, it was good, you know. And then the war ended, and My mom didn't know if I lived or died, and I don't know about my mom and my grandparents either, you know. So I got home, I got a ride on a milk truck that took me back to Rotterdam, and I walked in, and oh, it was a joy, you know, like you never know before, you know, everybody was so happy, and my dad wasn't there yet, and 2 months later my dad got there, and he was liberated by the Russians, and they took his shoes off, and because he had better boots than they did, so he was left with no boots at all, you know, but he made it home. And after that, you know, things were not, you know, it took a while for everything to get back to normal. So I thought, well, rather than staying here, I'll join the Dutch Merchant Marine, you know. So I did right after the war. And we went to, first we went to England and got to buy some fish and chips and all that stuff, you know. And then we went to Finland and Norway and Sweden, and I liked it. It was very nice. And we came back to Holland, and it was cold, it was wintry, and my mother says, "Now you've been away too long. You get a job here." So I tried it. I got a job at a machine shop, but I did that for about a month and a half, and I didn't like that. So I joined up the Dutch Marine, and the boat was in Antwerp, Belgium. So I took the train there after saying goodbye to everybody, and we're on our way to the United States, to Baltimore, Maryland. And we get to Baltimore, and you know, wherever country you're in, you get paid in that kind of money, so you can visit a restaurant or buy some stuff, you know. So I bought some clothing and some tablecloths for my mother because I figured I was going to go home, you know. Well, then I met a gentleman at a restaurant, and he says, "Oh, you're Dutch. You ought to go to Holland, Michigan. You know, that's where all the Dutch are." Well, that sent a bell off, you know. Hey, maybe I ought to, you know, what? There's nothing to lose. You know, if they catch me, they can send me back, you know. So I hitchhiked from Baltimore, and the first stop we stopped was in Indianapolis, and the guy said, "Well, that's as far as I go." And I stood on the side of the road there. It must have been 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and nobody picked me up. So the same guy came back about a half hour later, and he says, "I got help from my mom for leaving you here. She says to bring you home so you can have a good meal and you can sleep in our house." And I kept in contact with those people for years because they really were a godsend, you know. So I had supper there, and we talked. You know, I couldn't converse too well because I spoke only Dutch and they were speaking English, but we got sign language and we got it down pretty well. And so the next morning I had breakfast, and she says, "Well, have a safe trip," you know, and all that stuff. So they put me back on the road, and I'm standing there for maybe 10, 15 minutes. He comes back again. He says, "My mother says to give you $5 in case you run out of money." And so I did that.
How old were you at that?
Huh?
Say how old you were too.
Well, I was 16, you know, hitchhiking across the United States without speaking a word of English, you know. So I see a Holland Motor Express coming down the road, and I thought, well, Holland Motor, Holland, hey. So I waved him down, and he stopped. In those days, they picked up people very easy, you know, it's not like today. So that guy gave me a ride all the way into Holland, Michigan. And the first thing I saw when I come into Holland, Michigan, there's a big sign up there that says Netherlands Hotel. I don't know if that's still there or not. It's right on 31 where you're coming in, you know. I mean, on the old road, not the US 31, you know, the old 31. So I went in there, and they said, yeah, we'll have a room, you know. So I got a room. So the next morning, she says, "You ought to call the nursery here. They're Dutch, and they probably can use you to work there, you know." And by the way, she says, around the corner, there is a jewelry store called Peepers. And they have all kinds of Dutch postcards in the window. So if you stop there, maybe you can do something, you know. So I did. I went around the corner, and there was Peepers jewelry store. And they said, "Oh, you need a job?" And I said, "Yeah. Well, there's a Weller's Nursery here in town, and I'm sure they would like you, you know." So she called. An hour later, they were there. They bought my breakfast and everything, you know. Took me, yeah. So I had a job. And all that time, you know, I used to order every time I went to a restaurant. I didn't know what to say, so I ordered what everybody else did, hamburger, you know. Well, they got to be old head for a while, you know, hamburger, hamburger, you know. So I sit one day next to a guy, and he ordered eggs and bacon and stuff like that. Oh, boy, that's good. So I thought, well, I'll order eggs and bacon. And I said, that, you know, she must have come back and say, how would you like your eggs, sunny side up or what, you know. And I didn't know what to say. I said, give me a hamburger. So I went back to the hamburgers, you know. And, yeah, so after that, I worked there for a while, and we were at the beach. About 8 months later, I met a couple gentlemen. They said, well, you should go to Grand Rapids because they have a Dutch baking company there, Postma Baking Company, and they need some help. So I went to Grand Rapids and worked at Postma Baking Company making Dutch rusk. I don't know if you know what those are. They're like pieces of toast, but they're kind of crunchy and hard. They come in a
brown tube.
Brown tube, and you know, they're like toast already made, you know, and they put egg on it or whatever, you know. So I worked for them for quite a while. And then I got a job at the American Coating Mills that was printing. So I just started doing that and printing, and did that for 1.5 years, and then I got a job. I met the mom, and I was where the factory was is right by the bridge, Blue Bridge, and her mom used to come down there, and she worked at Bissell. And we used to stop there for lunch. Well, I didn't know her at the time, but we got to know each other eating lunch every day. So she wanted to know what I did and what she did, and what's your number, what's their number. So we finally got together, and we got married in 1948. So, yeah, and then I joined. Somebody said, well, you should join the Guards, you become a citizen, you know. So I went to the office down there, and I says, can I join the Guards? He says, are you a citizen? I says, no. He said, would you like to become one? I said, well, certainly, you know, that's why I'm here, you know. Okay, so raise your right hand, speak the truth, nothing but the truth, you know, and all that stuff. So I became a National Guardsman. And then 1 year later, that story in the paper there, they want to know about the Dutchman that joined the Guards that came from Holland, you know. So I had to give him a big story because it all was a big lie, but I hated to do it, but I didn't want to get caught and sent back right away, you know. So in 1954, I've been in the Guards a few years. I became a Master Sergeant. I thought I better give myself up before they catch me and send me back, you know. So I got in contact with Mr. Wickers. And he says, well, there's no problem, you know. You've been behaving yourself, you know. You're married. Probably have a kid on the way, you know. So let me see what I can do. I'll call the immigration people and say, what happens if a man will turn himself in, you know? What do you do to him? So he called back and he says, they're not going to do nothing. They might arrest your paper and parole you on paper, but they're not going to arrest you at the moment. You know, you have a legal precedents that you can go through before they can ship you back, you know. So I did that, and I applied for citizenship then, and they said, well, it takes a special order of Congress to make you do that because you didn't come under quota. So everything went through, all those, I got the papers there saying that my petition was denied. I had to leave the country. So the closest thing, I could have gone back to Holland, but I was getting letters from Holland saying I had to serve in the war over there because they were fighting Indonesia. And I didn't want to do that either, you know. So I went across the river, Detroit, and went to Windsor. And before I left, the people in the United States gave me a letter saying, if you're not accepted in Canada, you have to come back here, and then from here we'll ship you back to Holland, see. So they gave me the papers, put me on the bus, and sent me to the tunnel to the American Embassy in Windsor. And I had to go to a bunch of questions and ask him what was going on, and he says, okay, we can do that, you know, raise your right hand, speak the truth, nothing but the truth, you've never been a communist and all that stuff, you know. I did. So I was granted a visa to the United States. So the next day I came back into the United States, and the guard says, "Welcome to the United States." I said, "Hey, I just left here yesterday." So, but then it takes from 54 to 57. It takes 3 years if you're married to an American spouse to become an American citizen. You know. So in 57, I'm allowed to apply for citizenship papers, and I did. And then they ask you, you know, all kinds of questions. And so I went to the government building in Grand Rapids and to fill out a form for my citizenship papers. So the lady says, you know, when did you come to the United States? And I says 1947. And I put on there 1947. She says, when did you get here legally? I says 1954. She says, you're not understanding this right. You can't be here in 1947 when you didn't come into this country till legally 1954. And I had to tell her the whole story, you know. Finally we got that all straightened out and the papers went in. Then I get a notice saying I have to go to court about my citizenship paper. But you have to bring a witness. So I thought, well, I bring my minister, you know. So I took my minister, but the trouble was he was born in Holland too. And at the time, when his father came, the whole family became a citizen. Once the family became, the father and the mother became a citizen, the kids naturally become a citizen. So we're standing in front of the judge and he says, did you bring your witness? I said, yeah, this is Reverend Borst, you know, Dutchman. You remember that, Reverend
Oh,
Borst?
he was the hail and brimstone type of minister where he'd beat on the
And-
pulpit.
And the judge says, Reverend Borst, where were you born? He says, in Holland, sir. And can you prove it? And the Reverend says, no. He says, my mother and dad became a citizen, but I'm not. He said, no, that won't work. You have to get your own papers, you know. So I got my minister in trouble without even doing anything, you know. But everything went by, you know, he got his papers, and finally they had the announcement that I could become a citizen, and Jerry Ford was there, you know, and Fountain Street Baptist Church. I got all the names there and what happened, and he was quite, yeah, what is the word? He was,
Awesome in letting you stay.
no, he was, you know, involved in me getting here and getting my
right.
citizenship papers.
Right.
Jerry Ford did.
Right.
So he sent me the letters thanking me, and I thanking him and all that stuff. And so after that, well, 54, 57. Oh, then I joined. I joined the Guards naturally, you know, and I did that. Went to Camp Grading a bunch of times. Became best soldier, and that's beside the point. That ain't nothing, but you know. And I was a truck driver for 38 years, and we had 4 kids by that time, and so it's time for me to, yeah, what?
We went, that's when we went.
Oh,
What
in
was that?
'69, when the
69.
men walked the moon, for her senior year, I took her to Holland for 5 weeks, and we had a great time.